Hi again, everyone. We're talking this morning about what you can do when your dog has simply stopped listening to you or perhaps has never really listened to you. People describe it as if the dog's gone deaf or looks straight through you. So you might ask them to do something or just say hi, and it's as if they have edited you out of their lives. There are several reasons why this can happen, and it's probably worth unpicking those just a little bit because it will guide you as to what you can do about it. So the first thing is to just check in with yourself, look at your dog, and see whether they are actually quite overwhelmed in that moment. And it doesn't have to be the case that, well, they weren't overwhelmed in that moment yesterday, therefore they can't be overwhelmed today. If you really look at them, you might see signs of stress on their face. You might see that their eyes are a little bit out on stalks, or their ears have gone flat. It might be that they're quite shut down within themselves, and therefore they are unable to interact with you. So that is often part of a situation in which a dog is no longer listening to their owner. And you might think about exactly what's going on for you and your dog, and we'll talk about some examples. The other thing that could happen is that your dog simply doesn't know why they would listen to you. Dogs are quite simple creatures, perhaps mentally similar to 2, 3, 4-year-old child. They may not understand a lot of what you say, and they don't feel that what you're going to ask them or speak to them about means anything good for dogs. So if you want your dog to tune into you, you have to start being meaningful in the dog's life, and that means you are going to cause something good for dogs. So if you stop being meaningful in your dog's life, the best way forward is to find some new interactive games to play, tuggy, fetch, or quite simply chase the treat. So for dogs who haven't learned how to tune into their owner, you would completely stop feeding them in a bowl or any enrichment toys. You'd get their daily food allowance of food in a pot, and maybe half at a sitting or a quarter in the pot, and sit there and just throw one slightly out to one side and then out to the other side, and then perhaps in front of you. You have to do that in a really low intensity environment, nothing else going on. And you could just simply feed them from your hand. There is something really bonding about hand feeding. So you have to teach the dog that when you move, speak, hand signal, something good is going to happen. You're going to whip out that favorite toy or give them a piece of food. So quite often, I think in dog training, the biggest frustration as a trainer is the dog is getting 3 meals a day of top quality raw food, and then the owner takes them out amongst a whole load of other dogs, a really high intensity environment, and the dog won't recall for a piece of dried kibble. And on balance, the dog's probably right. It's not worth it for the dog. So you have to teach the dog over time that you are the person they have to tune into in their world. And most often what that means is paring back the intensity of what is going on and then upping the reward for your dogs. So a couple of examples. Yesterday, I was teaching a group class, a very good group class, where the dogs are superb. And one of the dogs was sniffing the ground, pulling on the lead, a behaviour or a series of behaviours that's quite unusual for that dog. And quite rightly, the owner was just a little bit frustrated, despondent, that we seem to have backtracked. Now, there could be a whole range of reasons for it, but if on balance in that situation, the dog can't concentrate, we have to up our game. And rather than just give them a treat, give them a handful of treats, scatter feed on the floor, throw a toy to keep them tuned in with us. And actually, this live session is well timed because I just went out about 9 o'clock this morning, and I do walk my 3 together when I am doing training walks with the puppy, because the Labradors stay nice and lined up alongside, and I've got a clicker and a treat bag, and the boys know that when I am training another dog, they can ignore the clicker and all the treats. They get their treats for their behaviours. And I got out the front, or the back door actually, and I asked them to sit. And I must have done that 30, 40, 50 times by now with the puppy, and puppy just looked at me as if to say, what are you talking about? And just pulled on the lead and tried to eat a piece of moss. So I soldiered on for about 5 minutes, and puppy was just like utterly unable to concentrate. And I have to say, I felt despondent and frustrated. So what I did, so I put the puppy back in her crate with the toy, finished walking the boys, and then switched them around, and I went out with the puppy. And actually, before we left, she went in the garden and she had a big poo. So sometimes at the beginning of the walk, the dog needs a poo. They might be tired. It doesn't matter in a way. If your reward structure doesn't work in that instant, you have to change the game. And I could have just carried on and had a really miserable 20-minute walk, and probably got stressed and induced stress in the animals as well. When I went back out with her, now she is a Border Collie puppy, so she's not as treat orientated as the Labradors, but without the Labradors there, who weren't being overly distracting, I was able to up my game. And she'll do loads for a treat, but what she doesn't want to do is look, have a treat, look, have a treat. And I was able to bring my A game, ask her to do hand touch, do a spin, change the sides that she walks on to keep her actively engaged with me. Because before that, I suspect that the piece of moss, or later a leaf, was in fact more interesting than me. So when your dogs don't listen, it is really about us changing the game. Yes, it's worth trying to pick into why they aren't listening in that moment, but it really is up to us to change the game. Now, the huge caveat to all of that is that sometimes we don't have time, energy, and resources to, in my case, I have 3 dogs, to put one of the dogs away and walk them all separately. It might be that we routinely go to the same place and it's easy for us to do that on our walks. So if you feel like, yeah, you understand what the issue is, but for some reason you don't feel like you can change your schedule, change what you're doing, then you might want to consider a bit of a training intervention. And the 2 props, stepping stones that I would train are teaching the dog how to be on a mat and how to relax on the mat. We call it a mat settle. And conditioning a really high intensity response to a toy. And lots of people will say, oh, my dog doesn't like a toy. If you want your dog to be nuts about a toy, you actually have to train it, and there's a way of doing that. So if the dog knows that for you, the action of putting a mat down means they should now relax, that can help you to get them to re-engage with you and reduce overwhelm. And a really well-conditioned toy in training will generally trump treats. So if your dog is utterly overwhelmed and you can whip out a favorite toy, quite often that will enable you to steer them away. But both the mat and the toy need conditioning over several weeks, and it needs to be done fairly carefully. You can't just go out with a favorite toy. Put your dog in a situation where they're playing a really intense game with other dogs and expect if you wave the toy, you'll be able to call them off of those dogs. You would have to have done that day after day after day. So with Lawrence the Labrador, I have a banana-shaped prey dummy. I can call him off anything, but I put the time in. And for the puppy, it's a tuggy toy. So if all else goes to worms on my walk, if I whip out a tuggy toy, she will just walk along with the toy in her mouth. So it's about the same length as her lead. So she carries one end of the toy, and then I have her on the lead and I can carry the other end. But we tug a lot during the day. She tugs with the other dogs. So she's really rehearsed that behavior and she finds it increasingly rewarding. So if your dogs aren't listening to you, there is also one thing you shouldn't do, and that is induce fear, anxiety, or stress in your dog. Now, unfortunately, dogs are super good at reading your expression, your respiration rate, pupil dilation, your body orientation. So your dogs know when you're stressed or cross. You really don't need to raise your voice. They already know. So one of the things that can happen is if you're already a bit getting tense with your dog, they're like, well, you're not worth talking to. So if you are getting stressed or overly intense, I would just put your dog away, just go home. If you're out on a walk, just call it a day, bring them home and start again the next day. And for yourself, start off with a more manageable bite-sized chunk of work with your dog. Your dog doesn't have to have 2-hour walks every single day. Most dogs would really benefit from having less walks and more training. So, you know, if you really feel like you can't get traction with your training, please feel free to get in touch. You can phone, text, WhatsApp, or use the contact form. Or if you're in classes, just grab me before or after a class, and I'm happy to talk to you about some changes you can put in place. That's it for today. If you're watching on replay, please could you leave me a #replay in the comments, and please, if you have any questions at all, put them in the comments and I will get back to you. Thanks. Bye.